Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Colin, and thank you so much for having me. If this is our first time meeting for new visitors, my name is Alyson Spinas-Valainis. My pronouns are they, them. I usually go by Al. I am a professional softball player. I work for BSUK as the Fastpitch Softball Development Manager. I have played internationally as a professional for since 2015 now. I played 4 seasons in New Zealand, 1 in Australia, 2 in Czech Republic, 1 in Germany, 1 in Poland, and I am entering my 5th season playing for Olympia Haarlem in the Netherlands. I am a pitcher. And so if this is your first time being at one of my segments for Coach Summit, first of all, welcome. Last year I did a session on pitching. I did essentially a pitching lesson, which is still available through the YouTube hyperlink for the Coach portal. But for today, I really wanted to talk about more of the mental side of things. If last year was a physical delivery, this year is more so the mental stuff and some of the things that people do not talk about as often as they should. Now, there's a lot of different topics that I will cover, but I've broken it down into more of a physical standpoint on getting those mechanics right, secondary for the making adjustments period, and third of all, talking on communication and how to effectively do that. As Colin said, I will be pausing at each of those big breakpoints for any questions. So during the presentation, if you have any questions, please put those in the chat box. Further to that, we will have a full session, chat and questions at the end of this. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and put together hold on one second, just me, put up a PowerPoint for you just as a landing page. Let's go ahead and get that. All right, perfect. Hopefully you can all see this. Colin, if you can see this, please let me know.
All good, Al.
Perfect. All right. So this is kind of what we're looking at. We're looking at the pitching basics and pillars, in addition to mentality and communication. If it seems like a lot of things right now, don't worry, we're going to have a breakdown of each of them. Essentially what we're looking at through the whole part of this is our pillars, our basic pitching mechanics that you as a coach can focus on, and you as a player as well, from the perspective of someone that has pitched their entire life and also has gotten into coaching over the last few years. Having a mental side of that where both sides are as relevant as the other is kind of where the angle is on today's. We've got a few sections on things to remember when coaching pitching, things to remember when playing or pitching, and between those sections, there will be a junior section, like a youth development side, and a more elite side of that. In addition to that, we'll have a game ready session, including the warm-ups, our pitching persona, adjustments on the go, and how to properly communicate between a player and a coach. As I said before, any questions that you have, please put them into the chat box, and at the end, we will go through them. Let's get to it. So as we talk about the pillars of pitching, I'm not going to go through a whole delivery as I did last year, but essentially what we're looking at are the 3 pillars of our base pitching. The first of these is timing. Okay, and this will be a bit of a review for those of you that were with me last year. Our timing, tying together all the different parts, right? We've got an upper body, a lower body. In addition to that, all the things that go into that, which is our glove control, our arm control, our legs, and putting that all together in a very precise timing. Like pieces of a puzzle, these things need to work together. If they're not, then we're going to have some mechanical issue. We're going to have some injuries and things like that. Our second main pillar is power. If we are not generating power with our entire body, we are doing a disservice to our pitch. A lot of the times when I talk to new pitchers or junior pitchers, if I tell them to throw as powerfully as they can, a lot of them will rely on their shoulder and upper body in order to get the job done. When we talk about true power, we're talking about the entirety of our body from top to bottom, accumulating into that kinetic energy. And our third pillar is momentum. This comes up a lot more often in the women's game than the men's. And I think that's a shame because the amount of momentum and power that you can generate by using your entire body is astounding. Our bodies are capable of so much. When we rely on that momentum and using a full leap or a full drag and into where our release point is and what happens afterwards, we're looking at an entire pitch. So those are the three pillars. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you on it later. We've got our timing, our power, and our momentum. Now, what I could do is I could demonstrate the basics of this, but for those of you that have trained in this before or are pitchers yourself, a lot of these things will be reminders just before we start this. So our pitching basics, they start with our power line. Our power line is the line that goes in directly through the mound, straight to our catcher's chest and through home plate. If we are stepping on that power line every time we stride out in that pitch, we're going to hypothetically be able to throw a strike every single time. The other part of that is when we step out and we have our toes centered, and I will go ahead and pop up for this one. If you cannot see me, please go ahead and pause. Okay, so you can see from right here. So if I'm stepping on my power line, I want my toes to be partially focused towards a midpoint between directly towards my catcher and closed like this. If you see, if my feet are closed like this, I'm going to be fighting against this front hip. Instead, I want to have my toes partially pointed towards where the on deck circle would be over there. In addition to that, let me go ahead and get back over here. Hold on one second. Perfect. Excuse me, plants. In addition to that, we have our glove hand. Okay, so our glove needs to be in front of us when we are throwing. When I go around my circle, I want to be using my glove in tandem with the rest of my body. If I have a glove hand that never leaves my side, or I have a glove hand that opens up like this and it turns my shoulder when I go around that big circle, I'm going to be off balance with that. It's important that when we stride out and we open up with that glove, I should be able to see my catcher from right above it and using that in tandem with my arm. And speaking of my arm, making sure, especially from a development standpoint, that we have a nice clean shoulder rotation in a full circle when we go around this. So for example, sometimes when I see players starting, if I'm starting side on, if I see an arm that is overextending up here versus here, okay, if we focus on that circle, it's not going to be that full clean one, and that's going to give me shoulder issues further on down the road. When I talk about my full arm circle, what I'm talking about is having a nice clean rotation all the way up and all the way around. From the side on, you should be able to see that straight up and straight down like this. A lot of the times when you tell younger players to focus on throwing hard, they immediately tense in that shoulder. And that's not something that we necessarily want to advocate for. Being relaxed in that shoulder and relying on that movement and that clean rotation is how we're going to reinstate positive mechanics. In addition, a lot of the times when you have those younger development pitchers, they don't have their eyes on the target, right? And how easy is it to, when you're focusing on so many other things, to have that gaze go from a different target? Making sure that our pitchers stay focused on where their target is. Step one is focusing on the catcher, and step two of that is specifically focusing on the glove. Naturally, pitchers might have their eyes wander a little bit. Reinstating that pitchers need to have their eyes focused on their target, especially when there's a lot going on, will help us reinstate those good pitching mechanics. Now, going forward, we've got some things to remember, okay? And again, like I said before, this will be focused on youth and also advanced. So things to remember when you are coaching pitching for the youth. Okay. If you are a development coach that is working with pitchers at a very young age, either through player recruitment, you've got players that want to try it, you've got a under 10s team that is coming up, a school team. Now, this is simple, but it might help you a little bit if you feel like there's a lot to manage. Number one, pitching is enjoyable. And I'm always really shocked that when we start coaching, we immediately go to balls and strikes. Fast pitch pitching is one of the most unique movements that we have in this sport. Making sure that players know how cool it is one of the first things that we should be focusing on. So when you do that, make sure you let players know how exciting that is, how cool the movement is, especially when you get that aha moment out of them for the first time. Now, when we talk about coaching at a youth level, focus on the basics, right? It gets very easy to get overwhelmed between balls and strikes and all of this other stuff. When you are in a position where you're introducing pitching for the first time, just focus on the basics. Focus on a solid step forward on your power line, nice and relaxed on our shoulder, going around a full circle and keeping your eyes on the target. Those are really the first things that you should be focusing on when you are coaching development. And releasing the ball directly at that hip can fix a lot of those issues that players, especially early on, have. So the basis of good mechanics going forward, oftentimes the fix for throwing more consistently is a lot easier than we think. Sometimes it's just releasing the ball a little bit early, holding on to it a little bit later. That is something that you can pick up. But when we talk about releasing that ball, as a reminder, sorry, I'm going to be too tall. We want to release the ball right in front of our hip right here. Now, when it comes to development, sometimes that ball can get a little wonky going around the zone. Focus on those simple things before going into the more advanced things. Now, things to keep in mind when you are coaching at a more advanced level. Eventually, you're going to have players that have different body types. And although pitching pillars stay the same between our power, our timing, and our momentum, body types will change the way that you adjust to pitching. For example, if you are a pitcher that is super limber or has a really good jump and great leg traction, you might be a player that is able to do more than someone that is easier towards the ground or is not comfortable in that type. So being aware of that and being able to hold to those base mechanics while extending off of that will be a big part of how you can successfully train pitchers at a more advanced level. Now, one of the things that is always a bit surprising to me, and this is for any coach at any level, pitching should never hurt. If you have a player that is consistently telling you, my shoulder in the front hurts every time I pitch, that's a mechanical issue, and that shouldn't be happening. And there's a big difference between pain and soreness and fatigue, right? If you pitch a ton of innings on the weekend, you are going to be sore and you are going to be fatigued. The difference being, it is not pain. If we're talking about pain, that is an immediate red flag and there's a mechanical error. Pitching should never hurt, especially if we are doing everything correctly mechanically. And if there is, I encourage you to take a look at mechanically what is happening that is feeding into that pain. Now, the last part on this section is things to remember when you are playing, when you are pitching. If you are a youth player, and this is coaches, I tell you this as well, from the perspective of a player who is in that youth development, is just starting, it can be really easy to begin to compare yourself to other players. And that's the basis of our sport, of all sports, is a comparison between one force and another. However, pitching itself is a very specific thing. And as players go through their development stages, they will develop at different rates. And so it is very important. And if you're dealing with a lot of youth players, or you have a kid that's going through this, it can be very easy to focus on what the potential of it is, right? And get focused on that, right? I need to throw this. I need to be this. I need to be whatever. It can be very easy to start to focus on that. And unfortunately, that pressure and that external factor of I have to be something is a lot of the times reasons we lose pitchers at a very early age. And especially when it comes to youth and development. When it comes to new pitchers, maybe old ones as well, it is very important to focus on the things that we can control. The time that we put into training, the mechanics that we're holding to, and how much effort we put in. If you practice and have good enough mechanics, anyone can pitch. But the key is to be patient as players develop at different rates. Now, something to keep in mind if you are one of the more advanced pitchers, okay? And this is, I'm talking directly to players right now. For more advanced players, I challenge you, be curious. When we talk about pitching and you have a good understanding of what those three pillars are between your timing, your power, and your momentum, that gives you the opportunity to be curious about how you can push the envelope on those three things. If we've got good mechanics and we are feeling ourselves out as far as the different pitches that we can throw, I challenge you to think about how you can do more out of those things, right? Again, using that example, if you are super limber and you're super strong in your legs, how can you generate more power from them? And additionally, if you have a shorter stride, but you throw very consistently on your top two pitch, so say a fastball and a curveball, how can you ensure that you can do that on every one of those pitchers, not just the ones that you're best at? And pitching can be an incredibly individual experience if you craft it into your own using those baseline pillars and mechanics. How can you use your body to get more out of those pillars that we use? So I'm going to pause there. If there are any questions that are in the chat, Colin will pick those up. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move to our next segment, which is getting ready for games and what to do then. I'll go ahead and pause for a moment. I don't currently have the chat open.
We're all good there. We just got one from Becky. It's more a message. They had to run off. They've forward.
Oh no.
We look forward to having the link in the recording, but
amazing.
Thank you. So if there's anything that you really want to know or want to ask, that might be baseball related from a mental aspect, from pitching and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is exactly the same when you're on the mound, irrespective of whether it be baseball or softball. There's a lot of fundamentals that are the same. So feel free, pop it into the chat, type it into the chat. Al will then answer your questions at any stage.
Yeah, perfect. As there isn't any specific ones for this section, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. As Colin has said, go ahead and pop any questions relevant to this section into the chat, and at the end we'll get through all of them anyway. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and move on. All right, let's talk about the more physical part of these and moving into the mentality. Now, this is some of my favorite sections. I'm a big old pitching nerd, so you'll have to forgive me for that. Getting ready to play. Okay. And a lot of the times we talk about where we can build our consistency at, the difference between training to get ready for a game and to get ready for tournaments, especially those that are at the national team level. Now, I will not harp on this for a super long time, but for both coaches and players that are hopefully here and watching the recording later, my challenge to you is to think about what your warm-up serves as and what the point of your warm-up is. And spoiler alert, I'm going to answer for you. The point of your warm-up is obviously to warm up your body, right? You get to the field anywhere between 120 minutes to 60 minutes before your game. You get to take the field, you get to enter the dugout, or if there's a tournament, you're off to the side using a warm-up section. the point of that is to get your body and your mind ready, right? Get your team ready, get your coaches ready, start thinking about and really focusing in on what you're doing. Now, when it comes to pitching, you should be getting game ready. By the time that first inning happens, you need to be settled in. And a lot of the times when I see pitchers warming up, I see something almost lackadaisical, more relaxed, which I love. I don't want to see pitchers tense. But to the same notion, statistically speaking, most teams score out of all the innings the most runs in the first inning. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The main one is you're not settled. By the time that game rolls around, whoever punches first is the one that scores that first run. And a lot of the times it happens in that first inning. So as a pitcher, your warm-up, one, is to get your body ready, right? Make sure everything is up and running and making sure that you're settled in. But number two, you need to feel like you've already started playing that game by the time that first inning runs around. So for me personally, when I am training and getting ready for that first inning, I try to make things as game-like as possible. Now that starts from my mechanics, my release point using a spinner, all the way back to quarters, to full, doing things that get my mind and my body ready. However, right before that game starts, I make sure that I have pitched a modified first inning with my catcher. And that takes a little bit of extra time. It takes that extra space and it takes that extra mental capacity, but it makes a really big difference because by the time you get into that game, it already feels like you've pitched 2 innings. And therefore, that first surprise off of that leadoff batter or that second one up or the cleanup hitter, those don't hit so hard. And so if you can use your warm up to mentally put yourself in that game situation, the chances of you feeling like you got sucker punched in that first inning go down exponentially. That's all I'll say on that. I won't harp on it too long. Now, let's talk about our pitching persona. Now, this is something that I really love about pitching, is that every time you step onto the field, you are giving information to the people around you. You are the first person the other team sees. You are the first person the other coaches see. You are the first person that your coaches see. You are the center of that field. What information are you giving people? Now, I am a big theater nerd, so this will not be surprising. But for all intents and purposes, when you step on the field and you go into your craft and you go into that team and you go into what your skill is, you are putting on a performance. Okay. And this is something that I challenge a lot of my youth players to do, especially the quiet ones, which is if you are a quiet person by nature, if you're not that outspoken, you're a little bit shy, when you get onto that field, is that what you want to be? Because you have the opportunity to be whatever you want to be. If you want to don a mask when you step onto that field of someone that is constantly communicating and is present and just is a stone cold pitcher, that's your choice. You can be whatever you want to be out there. Because when we talk about that information, what information are you giving the people around you? Are you someone that looks like you're about to have a full-blown panic attack? Are you someone that looks like you are hyped and hyped and hyped until they get a good hit off of you, and then maybe 2, maybe 3, and you just deflate? That is constant information that is being given to the people around you. If you can control what that looks like, you have a pitching persona. For me personally, and this will come as a surprise to a lot of you that know me personally, I'm actually a bit of an introvert. I'm very good at putting on a performance and speaking and being present in that way. That's not naturally where I am. However, every time that I go into that field, every time I go into that circle, I want everyone to know I'm there. And that's not for everyone. That is not going to be everyone's persona, but it is something to think about. If you have the opportunity to choose what your persona, what your performance looks like, take that opportunity, because you can directly influence the information other people see out of you. If you've got an at bat with someone that is a little bit nervous to be in the box against you, what are they going to see out of you? Is it someone that is confident and is talking and is stone cold? Is it someone that really doesn't want to be there? Is it someone that's frustrated from the warm up still? That's your decision as a pitcher. And I don't want you to sleep on how much of a gift that is, if you can do something with that. Okay, so that's all I'll say on the pitching persona. Now, next part of that is making adjustments on the go. Okay, so you've gone through a whole session of, dang, my warm up was good. I'm feeling good. Everything's moving. I'm throwing the ball hard. My coach is telling me they like me. I'm feeling really good. And you get into that game and everything goes wrong because of external forces, because of internal on your team. Whatever the case may be, you can do every single thing right. And on one of these days, it is still going to go wrong. So what do? As a pitcher, it is so natural to almost panic, to press that panic button, especially because, as we said before, a lot of this energy and this starting positions resides on your shoulders. That's a lot of pressure. But when things start to fall apart, because they will, either external factors because of the weather, landing, the landing space, is it soft? Are you slipping on it? The mound, your daily ability, right? You could have a great warm up and you get into that game, and for whatever reason, everything feels really tense. What do? Now, my advice through this, and there's a few parts of this, is to focus on the tangibles. Okay. And this takes a lot of training and a lot of cognizant thought. Focus on the tangibles, because our emotions are incredibly useful and they are pivotal to our abilities as athletes. However, when you allow yourself to stew in them and you let them manifest in your frustrations in the middle of a game, the middle of an at-bat, it not only hurts your ability to focus, but it hurts your ability to be flexible. Now, our tangible parts of this is, number one, be present. And that's really difficult, especially when that panic button is starting to come on, right? You feel that strike zone is small right there. You feel very tense. Focus on being present. Now, if my challenge is to get the next batter out, right? Or I need to make sure I get this out, right? I'm at a 3-2 count right now. I need to get this batter out. Focus on one pitch at a time. Because as pitchers and as coaches, we tend to focus on the big picture, right? However, that full game scenario, there are so many ins and outs of what that outcome is. If you are able to focus on a single pitch at a time, that panic button is going to seem a lot smaller, because you are able to focus and be present for a single pitch at a time. When you start to feel calmer in that space, then you can do one pitch at a time, one count at a time, one inning at a time. It is a way to ground yourself. And there's no benefit in letting our minds get the best of us. You have to find a way to ground yourself. Now, another part of this, okay, so step 2 in being tangible and focusing on being present is you also have teammates. Now, I will speak from personal experience on this one. You have teammates that are there for you, but cannot throw the ball for you. You are able to use them. For me personally, I find that when I start to feel that panic button, when I start to feel that strike zone closing a little bit, when I start to feel that set in, right? I have a teammate. I turn to my first baseman, and we have a secret code that we use with each other. And instead of focusing on what's happening in my brain and letting that spiral, I turn my focus to my teammate. And it doesn't have to be a full timeout. It doesn't have to be this huge thing, but you have a moment to pull yourself out of your own mind and ensure that you are set up to do that. So for me, I call my first baseman over, and again, it doesn't need to be a full timeout. You get 20 seconds in between pitches. This first baseman and I, we share a joke and we laugh. And usually what they tell me is, hey, have you tried throwing a strike yet? And I was like, oh, dang, let me get on that, right? But that small exchange has suddenly taken me out of my spiral into, I focused on you, you see me, I do have the next one. And that it just alleviates kind of like a pressure balloon. You have teammates, and it can look different in whichever way that you find comfortable, but you have teammates on that team. They can't throw it for you, but they can help you when you feel alone in the circle. The third part of this, okay, focusing on those tangibles, is to run through your mechanics. And this is only possible when that panic button feels a little bit further away. Now, the chances are that, especially if you are at a certain level, your solution to a pitch that isn't working is mechanical, and it's just right here. So if I am able to self-diagnose mid-game, it's one of the most important reasons to be self-aware and cognizant of why you pitch the way you do, and to be aware of your own mechanics. So for example, if I have a curveball, right? Best pitch I have, if I have a curveball that doesn't have that nice tight spin on it, but it has an uptail on it, I know I need to be more balanced because I'm leaning backwards when I release the ball. If I can shift that weight forward to be more balanced and cut through that on my release point, I will suddenly have a pitch that cuts downwards rather than up. But that's one of those things that does take cognizant self-awareness. And that's one of the reasons that coach and staff are incredibly valuable during this time. However, on the flip side of that, coaches, I don't know how to tell you this. You are an incredible resource and you are irreplaceable. However, there will come a time when your pitchers must stand alone on the mound. And in that position, similar to a kid seeing their adult leave the house for the first time, it is that pitcher's responsibility to be able to be cognizant of their own mechanics and their abilities when they're out there on their own. For us, we need to be able to sit back and help them when we can, but there is not always going to be an opportunity to do that. So one of the reasons it's very important to have that constant communication between a pitcher and their catcher is because the catcher is someone that is out there. The catcher can help in those things. Now, mind you, it does require a full timeout for them to have a discussion, but making sure that they are working together as a synthetic piece will help with that. So on the whole, being an athlete, it is just as important to be able to make adjustments on the fly as it is to have good preparation in our craft. Pitching especially, because as much as it is a team sport, it is also one of the most individual team sports. No one can throw the ball for you. As a position player and the rest of your teammates, they have their own responsibilities to perform, and no one can do it for you in the middle of an inning. You also can't disappear off the field if things are not going the way that they planned and you feel that pressure. So it's very, very important to understand and take ownership of that. The truly gifted and relentless athletes are the ones that make those quick adjustments and can maneuver out of a bad situation to give themselves the best chance of victory. And it is not easy. It takes years of mental conditioning and being self-aware of who you are off in the field, your job on the team, what your mechanics are, and constant check-ins with yourself and your position. We'll go ahead and pause there. That is the second part of this that we are done with. I'm going to grab some water real quick before we head into the final bit. Colin, if there are any questions, feel free to field them at me.
Good. Whilst you're having your sip of water there is one that popped into the chat from our good friend Patrick. In what relation do you mentally prepare yourself in regard of the umpire who's calling the game at the plate? Also, how do you adjust to his or her strike zone during the game? And it continues to, as a coach, what do you tell pitchers who get upset about an umpire not calling a strike zone if they struggle with a zone?
Yeah.
So some nice questions there from Patrick.
Really good question. Thank you, Patrick. Amazing. Now, and this is a personal perspective. This is what I try to teach. It won't necessarily resonate with every pitcher, but, and this is a very simple answer, but it's one that has really stuck with me, which is umpires are just people. And you know what? From that pitching perspective, they're wrong most of the time. But at the end of the day, their job is to call a 50-50 chance, right? Anytime that there is an out or someone is safe or a ball or a strike, it is a 50-50 chance. Yep. Umpires are people. And for me personally, when I struggle with an umpire, right? Because every once in a while, the pitches that I am best at are best served in a higher strike zone. So when I have an umpire that calls very low and very off the corners, I would struggle. But, and this is part of those adjustments, if you have enough confidence in yourself to be able to make those mid-game adjustments, you shouldn't have to worry about an umpire. And this is the difference between getting to that higher level and the development, because it does get very easy to focus on this person's wrong. They want me to lose. They just can't see anything. I feel like I'm pitching so well. My suggestion in that is, and this is partially my talk that I have with myself when I feel that starting to happen, which is just pitch better. Because at the end of the day, and that seems a little harsh, and I've had this conversation with my teammates as well that do tend to focus on that. For me, I tell myself, throw better. And here's one thing that we can get out of. If I throw well enough, hitters are going to swing at it, and I don't have to rely on an umpire. If I tighten that spin and if I hit that outside quarter a little bit harder, that hitter is going to swing. They'll make the call for me because they're going to swing and they're going to miss. This is very revealing to how my brain works as a pitcher. But if we focus instead on giving the umpire the chance to get into our psyche, we are giving the power to them. That power that I talked about that pitchers have, that information bank, that energy bank. When we focus on umpires, we give that information and that energy to them instead of holding it for ourselves and saying, you know what, I'm going to make this hitter swing. If they hit it, my fielders are going to get it. And there's a very fine balance between laying balls over the plate and making it look really good for a hitter. But the other side of this, right? Because that's how we as pitchers should approach the situation. Umpires are always going to be there. Let's not give the game to them. Now, when it comes to adjusting to a strike zone, it is also very important to be able to have control of our pitches enough to make that change. If I do have an umpire that has a very low zone, I personally, my best attributes as a pitcher do not quite align with that. However, it is still my responsibility to get the job done for my team. So I have to make the adjustment. Now, what that means is instead of leaning back on pitchers when I follow through, I'm instead going to lean forward and try to cascade those balls a little bit lower in that zone. And if it gets to the point, because sometimes, and this doesn't happen so much as the higher levels, but as you're coaching development and through it, you might get an umpire at some point that you just cannot make happy. And that is part of the game as well. My suggestion would be, as a coach that is coaching someone, be cognizant of when that panic button happens for your pitcher, especially if we're talking about a under 12 group or talking about an under 14, if you have a pitcher that is a little bit prone to hitting that panic button or that meltdown button, focusing on the part of development that encourages enjoyment out of it. There's a fine line here. Be cognizant as a coach on how close that pitcher will be to that panic, because if they're not enjoying it anymore and this becomes a response to an umpire that is not giving them their calls, I would be very cognizant of that, and I think that's a different discussion out of that. But it's all about making the adjustments and the stubbornness to hold on to that energy that belongs to me as a pitcher instead of giving it to an umpire, because there are some umpires that will probably enjoy that power. But yes. So thank you so much for that, Patrick. I'll pause real quick and get some more water. I'm very thirsty. But otherwise I will go ahead and start the next session after I, drink my 2-liter.
Thanks, Patrick. Yes, love your answers. Couldn't agree more. I umpired some of your games behind the plate. Yeah, Patrick, don't give away some of your secrets there.
Yes. Hey, Patrick, I'm not giving it to you. I'm not giving you the power. I'm going to keep it.
Right, Al, you good to go?
Perfect. All right, let's talk about speaking and communicating. One of my favorite parts. Okay. Now, again, as I said before, I will break this down into a few sections, both in more of a development standpoint and more of a elite level. So let's talk players. I'm talking to you. Let's start. When you speak to a coach, okay? Similar to the tangible parts of our thoughts when we are playing and focusing and making adjustments, we must also be cognizant of a coach's role as well. Now, generally speaking, from top to bottom, a coach is there to ensure that the ship sails, right? A full ship of a team is what it takes to win games. Now, the further away from development in youth, right, that might not be quite the goal when it comes to when you're first starting. You've got T-ball, under 10s, under 14s, etc. To that elite level, that role will change a little bit. But at the bare minimum, the coach's role is to ensure that things run smoothly. Now, at higher levels, it starts to determine more. The team needs to be successful, whatever it takes to do that. They have to drive an entire ship. Now, by using that logic, players, it stands to reason that the information that a coach needs from you is the status of your ship's part. As the pitcher, you are a very important part, but you are not the only part. So your coach needs to know the bare minimum of that status report, which is how run down is the piece? What is the endurance of the piece of the machine? How, whether the machine part can even function right now, especially when we are talking about deep in tournaments, deep in, national team activities. What is your status? And focusing on the true tangible parts will be the best way to communicate with your coach. Now, there's a difference between your status report on the ship and speaking to a person to person. Your ability and capacity to perform is a tricky one. And it does depend on many, many variables, such as the level that you're playing at, your specific role within the team, and other factors. However, when you are speaking to a coach about your ability to pitch or perform or maintain consistency, it is important to remember and hold to the following. I'm going to blow your minds. Speak honestly. Pitchers, I'm looking at you. Speak honestly. Because when it comes to competition, if you tell a coach that you are 100% good, you're rested, you're prepared, you're uninjured, you're ready to go, but your results, your tangible results in the game do not support that claim. For example, you have a meltdown in the circle by frustration, you can't throw because of an injury you didn't tell your coach about, etc., etc., etc. you didn't maintain the status quo of honesty between you and your coach. And unfortunately, there could be lasting effects in that trust going forward. Now, the second piece of this is know your own capabilities, especially once you get into a higher level, a more elite level on those national teams. You go through the system at that level. It is so crucial to know your physical capabilities. Now, you'll notice I did not say your potential status. Now, there's a key difference between the two of them. The place that you are there and then is what you are reporting on, not what you would like to do, not what you envision for yourself, but physically being in that place and being present in your own capabilities at that moment. If you are four days deep into a tournament and you can feel that your engine endurance is not recovering as quickly as you hope because of, quick game turnaround, because you've had to pitch a few extra innings because of injuries on your team, it is important to be cognizant of that, to be able to use that information cleanly and concisely with your coach. It is in your best interest to tell your coach that, using tangible pieces of information, clearly discuss with them what your capacity is. For example, coach, I would love to go 5 innings out there by myself, but I am really not sure if I can make it a full 5. However, I will give you everything I can, but I would have a backup, our reserves ready to go in 3rd to 4th inning. That's a tangible thing that your coach can work with. Now, the flip side of that is if you go to your coach and you say, I don't know, coach, I'm just not really feeling it. What can your coach do with that? Because at the end of the day, they need to make sure that this ship is sailing. If you are telling them nothing tangible, nothing that they can do something with, A, they're going to take you out of there entirely, or 2, they're going to put you in and not expect anything. And neither one of those is a good place to be as a pitcher. So if you can focus on the tangible things that you can do, if your coach expects you to go 3 solid innings, get through this lineup 1.5 times, you need to be able to tell them, yes, I will do that. I don't think I can do all of that, but you will get my 100% until I cannot, and have someone ready to go. I want you to be ready to get in that rotation. Those are tangible things that it takes a really long time to develop. But the sooner that you're able to do that, the better you're going to be able to communicate with your coach. And it takes a lot of time and communication to do this, but it does tell the coach the information that they need in order to make valid and concise decisions, and it places the ball in their court. Now, this is a pet peeve of mine. Are you ready? Players, look at me. Never, ever focus on the I can't or the I cannots. Don't do it. Just don't do it. From a place of empathy, I get it. It is very easy to focus on your failures. I get it. However, when we focus on those things, right? Congratulations, you are struggling. Welcome to our sport, in which most people fail more than they succeed. You are a regular person under that uniform. Congrats, you came across the meaning of life. However, if you wallow in that feeling, in that I can't do anything, I can't do this, that is not, 1, it's not helpful. And 2, it's just ego, because you play a team sport. And if you decide to carry those negative emotions, like we talked about before, that ball of energy and that emotion and that tide turning, you are sullying the power that you have. You are relying on your ego to follow into a very unhelpful place. So instead of going to your coach and saying, I can't do this, I can't do a single thing right, don't do it. It's not helpful. It doesn't give the coaches the information they need. In fact, it gives them really bad information that you probably don't want them to have. Now, it is your decision and this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I'm going to do it. It is your decision to let your outcomes affect your interactions and your performance. There, I said it. It is your responsibility to take ownership of your outcomes and accept them with grace. A lot of people talk about short memories when it comes to this, right? Cool, that happened, let it go, move on. Okay, I challenge that. I want you to have a short memory, but I also want you to retain the information that led you to that mistake, right? If I hung a changeup right down the middle and that went sailing over my head and it right through center field, I need to retain that information. I cannot dwell on it. And there's a big difference between the two of them, but I need to retain that information. So when we speak to our coaches, do not fall into the, I can't throw a strike today, or I'm just useless today, I should just be taken out. Because you know what? You're right. In that moment, the information that you have given your coach is that up here, you are defeated. You are done. And it is not worth my time to put you in. And that is a really hard pill to swallow when it comes to our pitching mentality, because it is easy to look at our results and get really wound up in those things. But it is not helpful. And the information our coaches just taken is that, yeah, okay, you can't do those things today. Go sit down. Hope that makes sense. On the flip side, okay, so we'll pause right there. Whew, ready? Our last section here is talking to players. And this is, I'm going to flip it on this. Okay. So we have just talked about how pitchers can give, can better compromise and work with coaches and have that honest direction. I'm going to flip that now. And let's talk about how coaches can speak better to players. Okay. Coaches. Hey, I'm talking to you now. This will change depending on the level in which you are coaching at, right? If you are working with 10-year-olds to the national team, obviously there will be different points of reference, right? But when you are a development coach or you're working with youth or those younger age groups, it is important to be focused on the enjoyment and participation of sport. And that seems like a no-brainer, but hear me out, Dad, I'm talking to you. Let your players enjoy what they're doing at that age, right? Because if we insert ourselves into what it needs to look like right away, a lot of the times we do lose those players that just really want to have fun with their team and they want to hit the ball hard and throw the ball hard and all of these other things. It is important to recognize your role in whatever age group that you're working with. And if you are in a position where it doesn't feel natural at this age group, really take a critical look at the age group that you're working with, and make a decision based on that for the players. However, that being said, coaches, hey, I'm still talking to you. Focus. You must remember the following. Regardless of the age, the skill, the level, your athletes are there because they love this sport. And that, again, that seems like a super no-brainer. But I feel like a lot of the times, and I don't personally have these coaches right now, but especially going up through the system, there were coaches that felt like they were living their experience through me. And as a player, I didn't enjoy that very much. It is very, very important to remember that regardless of what level you are coaching at, the people that show up and play every weekend for you, that show up 3 times a week for training, that go the extra mile, travel hours and hours out of their way, they are doing it because they love this sport. And you need to respect that, because the love that they feel of a ball in their glove, the cleats in the grass, and the feel of a bat in their hands doesn't go away because they get burnt out of playing. A lot of it is because of the external forces at work. So never, ever lose sight of that. They love this sport as much as you do. So make sure that you honor that. And as a coach, it is your responsibility to facilitate growth, accomplishment, and maturity in your players. It can be very easy to insert ourselves into their journeys. We must always remember that we are a resource first, and it is for our players that we are doing this in the first place. Now, when we talk about speaking to players, my recommendation, let me try again. When you are speaking to players, it is my recommendation to be very clear and direct in the communication and in its purpose. Now, what I mean by that is that the most effective ways that coaches have talked to me and the way that I try to emulate this is that there are two ways of talking to a player. Number one is talking to players on a personal level, right? And that is totally fine to have if you want to have space on your team for that, right? Especially if you're at an elite level where you need to know the ins and outs of your players' lives, right? You need to know about that breakup that they just had. You need to know their mental state. You need to know whether they are fighting that injury that has been niggling for 6 months and how they're feeling about that, right? That's the emotional side, that personal side of that conversation. Now, the key here is that the second side of that is focusing on the tangibles of their game and their performance. When we mix the two, they can oftentimes get very messy very quickly. When we talk about talking to players on that first one, at the personal level, especially at those higher levels, it is important that the players know and understand that this is the place for it, that this is a space for having that conversation. It's not to be mixed with the playing status talk. On the other side of that is to remind and encourage players to focus on the tangibles of their game, their performance, and their overall goals. As a coach, you're managing the entire team with at least 9 individual players with their own hopes, goals, and needs. It is important to hold clear and distinct team goals as paramount over the individual needs for the 9. It can be tricky with that mix over, but it requires continuous reinstating, reaffirmation to help players be as comfortable in this space as they can. And finally, the most important part for coaches, well, players, even for those of you that are making the transition into coaching at this point. As coaches, you will see your players at their absolute best. You will see them at the precipice of victory in that aha moment we talked about. You will see them accomplish so much in your time with them. However, you will also see them at their absolute worst in defeat. Our best coaches in the world are able to facilitate trust, healthy communication, and growth within both sides of that spectrum that you are going to see. And so those are the most important things going into our coaching stuff. And that is our closing with questions. Hopefully we do have some questions at this point, but that is all the content, all the fresh new content that I am able to give you at this point. I will open the floor to any questions, comments, scenarios, or otherwise.
Thank you, Al. Something did pop up from your favorite, Patrick.
Oh, amazing. Hi, Patrick.
Patrick wants to know, there's a self-evaluation versus external objective evaluation.
Perfect. Amazing. So talking about the evaluation versus external. Patrick, sorry, let me clarify real quick. Do you mean from a coach's perspective or from a player's perspective or both? Just let me know. Both. Okay, cool. So when it comes to our, so I'll go player first, just because that's the head I'm in mostly. When it comes to being able to evaluate, I set this into a few different boxes, and I am very big on the journaling. I know that's not always super popular, and some people just don't vibe with that. But when I am trying to evaluate my performances for my own standpoint and to track progression, I separate them into a few different boxes. Now, I'll simplify this because I'm not going to take you through my whole journal. It's very revealing. But 3 sections. Number 1, did I perform to the absolute best of my ability? And the answers to all of these need to be a yes or a no. Okay, so I would look back on whatever I'm evaluating, whether it's a single game, whether it's a few innings that I went in. I would evaluate based on, did I do the absolute best that I could at that time? And it's a yes or no question. And below that, I leave room for comments. Number 2 is, did I accomplish what I needed to, right? Did I go in and did I make sure that no one got on base, right? Did I make sure I didn't have any walks that game, right? Those are personal performance things that I hold very true to myself. That is going to be the tangible, did you accomplish what you were put in to do, right? So that's either a yes or a no. Number 3 is, would I have changed anything about when I went out? And that's a yes or a no. And the reason I do that is because, number 1, the first one is, did I do my best, right? Did I try to the extent of my ability? That's an emotional pull, right? Because that doesn't account for that batter was just better than I was, right? Or there was external factors that I couldn't focus on. This had to do with my personal effort going into a situation. If that's a yes or a no, that'll help give me a few answers on my next 2. The second one is based on tangibles, right? I have season goals that I set with my coaches. Did I accomplish that in the time that I went in, right? If that's an inning, a game, et cetera, et cetera. It's a yes or a no question, which means I don't get to self-talk myself out of it, right? I don't get to defend myself in front of a jury and say, well, on the day, no, it's a yes or a no. And the third part of that is a mix between the 2 of them, which is the emotional side of, I gave up a home run and I hate that, right? Or I walked someone and I never walk anyone and I hate that, right? The third part of that is both the emotional and focusing on outcomes, right? So did I have regrets or things that I would do differently emotionally in what that offset of skill was, right? And what the tangible outcomes were. So for me as a player, that helps me balance that. And those might not be the same questions or prompts that you have in your own self-reflection, but those are the ones that speak specifically to me because I think they cover a lot of those bases. But that is not definitive of, everyone's experience. Coaches, all right, the difference between, oops, sorry, I lost it. Evaluation versus objective evaluation. All right. So from a coaching standpoint, and this is one of those things that comes with experience with the team, right? If you are just going in and coaching in a one-off or your first experience with that team, it can be really challenging to do this. This is more so when you are comfortable with the team that you're on. If you have frequent check-ins, you have those nice big conversations about life and sport, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I like to use a few different tools for this, focusing on the actual tangibles. And there's a few ways that we can do this. The ones that I really like is on a spreadsheet during games. And you can do this for training as well. I have a midline, right? So you got all the little boxes, like a spreadsheet. Every time, so if we're looking at a game situation, every time we throw a pitch, the line moves over 1. If it's a ball, it goes down. If it's a strike, it goes up. Okay, so it should look kind of like a heartbeat. Every time you get someone out, it's a dash through it. Okay, so you essentially break that. Now, when we're looking at a full game situation, you should have a tendency to stay above that midline. If you start to see we start going down below that line a little bit and back up. You'll start to be able to see that. And especially when you have pitchers that pitch for long periods of time, right? Usually a full 7 inning to 9 inning if you're baseball, you can start to see where the endurance is. Okay. Because as pitchers, and especially at a certain level, you need to be able to throw upwards of 75, 85% strikes. And that's a big number. So you can start to monitor that. Now, it takes a lot of additional effort to stay on top of those things, because that graph on its own is not going to give you all the information for a pitcher's endurance that you need. However, if you're flipping through every game and you have a graph like that, you should be able to see what a full season starts to look like. Another one that I really like is a flowchart of how effective. Okay, so you have your, you've got your paper here, you've got a little clipboard, you've got a field here. Let's see, you've got a field here, okay, with the fence. And every time you have a different hitter, you make a mark on where that ball was hit. If they didn't hit the ball and it was a strikeout, say you've got, Suka. Sorry, Suka. If you've got Suka in the lineup, right, and you happen to strike her out a few times, or she's not effective as a hitter, you would make a mark of that over on the side, right? But you'll start to see tendencies between right-handed batters, left-handed batters, power hitters versus slappers. You'll start to see those tendencies for what your pitcher is effective against. Now, the reason I gave you very specific charting options is because, especially if you've got pitchers that love talking, and this is something I have to stop myself from doing. We are so good at defending ourselves. We come out of a game, someone just lit us up and we're like, oh, the umpire today. Or, you say, oh, I didn't think I was pitching that bad. They just saw the ball really well, right? We are very good at feeding into that. Now, these charts will help you maneuver that as a coach, because you can physically show a pitcher, you are really ineffectual against this batter. We need to make adjustments. Or you are absolutely right, your endurance is good, but you fall off towards the 6th inning. We need you to get further than that, right? We need you to be above that midline come the 7th inning. Those are tangible things that are impossible for players to talk down. Another really good thing for this is video. Video is a really good way to keep your players accountable, because, and especially during lessons or during training or during games, it is very easy for a player to say, I felt like I was doing this. And I use this a lot with my pitching sessions that I have, which is I will record new things. If I am trying a new thing on a new lateral flow, I'm trying a new thing on a drag line, I will record them trying the new thing. And I'll say, did you feel like you did that? And if their answer is something along the lines of, yeah, I feel like I was doing everything perfectly, you turn around and you just show them the video, because footage doesn't lie. A lot of the times as athletes, we feel like we're doing the thing, right? We are doing that. Coach, I'm doing it. I'm doing my best. And you turn it around and you say, are you? I think you can do more than that, right? But it's an easy way to keep players and coaches on top of this. So hopefully that's a helpful enough answer for that, Patrick. It's a very big spectrum on all of that, but those are the best ways for especially pitching that that I tend to use. Let me see if there's anything else. I can't scroll down. That's an interesting one. So if anyone can see this, Patrick Rowe, as I witnessed, female athletes are very hard on themselves. Also, either gender is more likely to overstate their own status. Yep. That's an interesting one. And I'll try to keep gender out of it for the most part. I think it's the difference in style of plays as well. There is this is a big bucket. This is a big bucket we're going to jump into. The difference of plays between the two of them do allocate a certain amount of pressure that happens in the women's style game versus the men's. A lot of the times what I've experienced with the men's side, I don't even want to say you know what I mean. In that style of play, a lot of it is big and loud, and there's a certain expectation that you should see a bunch of sailing home runs during a game, right? That's just how the men's style of play is. When it comes to the women's side as well, I feel like there is a lot more of those small innings and small plays that add up very quickly in what your outcome is. Focusing on the short game, focusing on pitchers' duels, and not that those things don't exist in either side, but I think specifically in the women's style of play, you tend to see that a lot more, right? Where those things are determined by a single play rather than those the bigger I don't even want to say showier types of score lines per se. But I do think that there is a certain amount of accountability that each pitcher, regardless of gender, should have, right? And a lot of the times when we talk about this, I do find that pitchers are very hard on themselves, and they should be. I myself am incredibly hard on myself. But the difference between that is letting yourself wallow in what that responsibility means and taking it as like a badge of honor and saying, you know what, this is my job. This is what I do. And I am proud of that, good or bad. So I hope that that makes sense for some of those. If there are any other questions, please feel free to drop them in.
Anybody else? There's a couple of pitchers out there. I have seen your names. I'm not going to mention your names that are part of our participants. Could throw one or two names out there, Mr. Josh. Anything you want to ask Coach Al? Gary Renz, you're a baseball pitcher. Anything related to anything you want to ask related to baseball? You know, as we said before, the mental approach to both is very, very similar. When you're on that rubber, you're on the rubber, and that is, you've got to concentrate, you've got to focus, you've got the same job at hand, you've got to do a job for your team. So while we've got you, while we've got Coach Al, any other questions?
I could just keep talking as well. I'm real good at that.
Josh, Pete, how do you prepare through the off season mentally?
It's a really good question. A lot of it depends on the level that you are playing at, and the individual that wrote that. I'm not going to call you out, even though Colin just did. As you prepare in the off season, a lot of it will depend on your status on the team and your roles and responsibilities on the team. And if you are on a team for a very long time, you do know what those are. So I can talk from my own experience. It will change team to team and experience to experience, but I'll talk on my own. My team knows exactly what they're going to get out of me. They're going to get someone that will pitch all the pitches until my arm falls off. I am no longer the flashy strikeout pitcher that I used to be. I'm more of that I'm still very talented, don't get me wrong, but I consider myself to be more of a workhorse than the flashy strikeout pitcher that I was when, I was younger. That being said, the coaches know exactly what they're going to get from me, which means I need to make sure that my mind is right and fresh and ready to go. That means my body needs to be flexible for all intents and purposes. My stamina does not need to be as high as it would if I was younger, right? Because I am someone that will develop as season comes. However, one of the things that is expected of me is that by the time season starts, I will have a good grip on all 6 of my pitches. And that is something that does require maintenance through the off season. Now, my workload during the off season will be different from, for example, I'll go ahead and use Lisa Hopp as an example. If you know my team, you know Lisa. Lisa's work requirements on the off season are much different than mine. First of all, she's 6 years younger than me, so that's one of the factors here, is that she is able to train with the Dutch national team in a way that supports that. For her, she needs to make sure that her strength and conditioning are at a top level, because for Lisa, she can go about 5 to 6 innings and starts to feel that real fatigue come inning 7. Now she is that flashy strikeout pitcher, and so her requirements during the off season are going to be different than mine. Now, when it comes to my preparation, and I have gotten the privilege to do this because I am an experienced player. That's another name for old. Because I am in a position that I'm consistently season in and season out of this, I work on my mobility. I work on my stretching and making sure that everything is feeling cognizantly powerful. Now, I don't need to do a ton of strength stuff aside from core. And so for me, during the off season, it is more important for me to give my body a bit of rest because of my experience. It is more important for me to give my body rest and get my mind focused than going out and pitching every day. And so for me, during the off season, I work on the torso series. I work on core conditioning. I work on my flexibility, and I work on my strengthening through my forearm. In fact, you'll see, I've got one of these. You can see in the background, I've got my weights all set up. It is really important for me to focus on my hands, my forearm, my shoulder, that mobility and that strength going in, and my finger grips going in, so that by the time that season starts and I'm starting to wind over a little bit, around January or so is usually when I do that, that I am essentially ready to go and ready to pitch full come end of March, end of February, early March. So it depends on your situation. For me personally, that's usually what I do. So I hope that was helpful. Josh Pete, you have a different one. I'm going to send you an email after this. Amazing.
Nice comment from Patrick at the same time.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. And that's one of the things as well that we talked about a little bit before, which was, what information do you want people to get? And so for me personally, I take it very seriously to be a constant battery of energy, regardless of how I'm actually feeling on the inside. It is incredibly important for me to be a catalyst of energy. And I told Colin this story earlier. I'm happy to tell the story again if that's what it is, but it makes such a big difference when you are in the middle of that circle, and you've got all eyes on you. Make sure the information that people get from you is something that inspires your team to do better and to do well and to perform at their best. And especially when things are going not great.
Right, any more questions from anybody?
Colin, do you have any?
I'm just trying to see who else is out there. A couple of other young pitchers down there on the list here. I'm just trying to see where they are. Ali?
They're off pitching.
Well, Clayton.
I spoke words and they're like, I gotta go work out.
Anybody else? Here's your chance. No. All right. If you do have any questions, and you might think of something when the session is over, please feel free to drop me an email. I will then pass it on to Al. Al will then be able to give us any information, whether it be gripping the ball, making changes in your stance or your stride, or whatever it is, whether it be just feet positioning, something really silly that you might not want to put on the chat, but you feel that's important to you, or you as a pitcher, please feel free to email it to me. We will answer your questions. Al's done a good job of explaining how things work and preparing mentally and stuff like that. And through my years of pitching, I could actually see myself back on the rubber going through some of those scenarios at the same time. So you'll never forget that. That's one thing I have memories and plenty memories of actually standing on top of the mound in baseball or as a softball pitcher. Got to get this bat out and I've got to work extra hard. I've got to dig deep. I made a bad call. It's his fault. It's never the pitcher's fault. Get off, start again. So many different ways of things. And thanks for bringing that all up, Alf. Makes me feel 25 again.
Yeah. If you're happy to, I'll go ahead and share that story that I shared with you earlier, Colin, just to finish up with.
Yeah, by all means.
Perfect. So just to truly encapsulate the power that pitchers have, right? And we talk about that information feed, et cetera, et cetera. The year was 2019, I want to say. Yeah, I think it was right before I took the job for BSUK. We were playing in the Dutch National Championship against Roof, who was a very energetic, very young upstart team that were in their first finals for the first time. And it's a best of 3 series. And so, first team to 2 wins. And we have a home game in I believe it was the third. No, it was the second game. It was the second game. And we are going into the 8th inning. It is a 0-0 ball game. And one of the really talented up and coming Dutch hitters is up to the plate. And this player sends it over the left field fence. And you could just feel the entire momentum in that moment start to shift. And that ball goes sailing into the canal. If you've been in the Netherlands, you know that there's just canals in here. It sails into the canals over our scoreboard, over all of our posters, over all of our fans. And it's one of those moments that you feel time just slow down. And you see that, you turn around and you're facing the center field. You see that ball go over, you see the runner going around second base, and you see your team coming into the circle as you get the ball, as you get a replacement ball. And I remember so distinctly that panic button starting to come up, right? And I can feel it in my fingertips where I start to get jittery. You start to feel that, the rush. You can start to hear people, you start to hear your heartbeat. And you feel that panic button starting to come on because that player was bottom of the lineup and we had the full first half of the lineup again to get through. And we had, I think, 1 out, and it was a do or die situation. And in that moment, I remember, covering the mound, right? That's how I recenter myself after a situation like that. And I remember looking up at the team around me in that circle. And it was kind of the first time that it looked like they didn't know how to approach me. And I remember looking at my third baseman and my shortstop, and they were just kind of like waiting to do something. And I remember so clearly in that moment, I had 2 decisions. One, I could let my fear show. I could take that moment and that crack in the armor would tumble into a snowball effect. You can feel it. And I remember feeling like, if I show this, we will lose this game. We will absolutely lose this game. And then there was the other hand. And I remember looking at my first baseman, who knows how to pull me out of my own head when I start to feel like that. And I remember grabbing the ball, looking at them all, and saying, well, I guess I have to wait another inning to go get a beer. All right, let's get some outs, right? And that just broke the tension like an air balloon, right? It was like all of the tension that was building as they came into that circle just dispersed. And we all laughed together. We ended up getting the next 2 outs, bang, bang, done in the dugout. We ended up coming back and winning that game. But I remember sitting, I'm a pitcher only. So I'm sitting, I'm in the dugout cheering for my team. And in the back of my head, I just knew that if that if I hadn't taken that chance and covered my fear, if I had not given them the correct information that they needed to have that confidence that I was going to throw the next ball, we would have lost. And that's that ball of energy and that composure and that information that I'm talking about. It is so palpable. And when you get into that situation, you too will have those two options of whether you take accountability and own that energy, or if you let yourself go by the wayside and break under that pressure. So that's the story I wanted to tell, because it's still to this day. I mean, it's been years later. We've had championships ever since, since then, but it's just a powerful, powerful thing. And it's something that I want all pitchers to experience at some point, because it just changes the way that you look at the game. So.
Something there from Patrick. I see you are reading it.
Yep, 100%. And it does come with experience. And our team and coaches are not allowed to say the O word. They're not allowed to say that. It's experience. And it does come with experience. But if you can focus on taking accountability early on, it's going to make your experience so much easier. Very early on, when I was 16, 17, I had the talk of what you can do with that energy and what information you're giving other people through body language, the way you carry yourself. And it stuck with me forever and has defined my career ever since then. And so the sooner you can figure that out, the easier it's going to be going forward. So.
Right. So there's nothing else from anybody else. Patrick. Very true, Patrick. Yeah, comes with the experience, as we say. Right. I'd like to just a little closing thing from our side. I want to just thank Al for sharing what Al has today. Really, really took me back to my heyday as a young pitcher, trying to pitch baseball and softball for many, many years, and that's why I can't put my arm straight nowadays, but that's another story for another day.
That's next year's Coach Summit discussion, which is, what do you do now that you're old and can't throw anymore?
Experience. Come on.
What do you do with yourself? You're right. Experienced. You're experienced. But
right. So thanks to everybody that did come online today. We never did record it, so there's somebody else that would like to watch it again, or you want to watch it again, or let anybody else know, it will be put up on the BSUK YouTube channel. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody again, and thank Coach Al.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. If you are looking for a more technical side, I know that the YouTube video of the delivery session that I did last year is still online. But I think that's up to Colin. So if you are interested in the more technical side of things, we did do a section on that last year. So just go ahead and send through to Colin and we can get you sorted. So.
Perfect. Right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Popped in there. Thanks from Ellen. Thanks from Josh Page. Appreciate it. Right. So thank you, everybody. We're now going to stop the recording. And if there are any questions, like we did say, please let me know. Feel free to send it to me by email. I'll get it off to Al, and Al will then be able to send it off to you. But once again, thank you to everybody. Have a good evening. Good night.
Night, everyone.